Create in us clean hearts, O Lord, and renew a right spirit within us. Something was wrong. Somebody else was supposed to have washed their feet before dinner, but nobody did. So Jesus got up from the table, interrupting the whole Passover dinner, and washed the feet of all the disciples himself. When finished, he sat down and asked them, "Do you know what I have done to you?" No answer. Silence. They were stunned. "Do you know what I have done to you?" Peter had tried to stop him. "You will never wash my feet." Embarrassed? He knew Jesus shouldn't be doing this dirty job. Or was it that Peter didn't want to be so vulnerable? Wanted to stay in control and not give in? Jesus blocked him, saying, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Again, Peter tried to stop him. Jesus held firm. Peter gave in. He yielded. How did he feel when Jesus held and washed his feet, the dirt and dust running off into the basin? What did it do to him? He must have been humbled. His defenses were down. He had accepted Jesus' servant help. He had accepted Jesus' servant love. They all had. Their feet were soothed, wrapped in a towel, and held gently but firmly, and Jesus wiped their feet dry. He knew them well and accepted them just as they were. He loved them just as they were. Yes, Jesus washed Peter's feet, knowing that Peter would deny him 3 times before dawn. Yes, Jesus washed Judas' feet, knowing Judas would leave in a few minutes to betray him to the Romans for arrest. Yes, Jesus washed Thomas' feet, knowing Thomas would doubt and disbelieve him when he appeared after his resurrection. When Jesus washed the feet of all 12, he knew that as the disciples had walked to the house of the upper room that night, they may very well have been arguing again. Arguing about which one of them was the greatest. He knew that they may well have arrived at the upper room too grumpy and prickly to offer to wash one another's feet in the absence of a servant. After all, the host who volunteered the use of the upper room had not provided a servant. Evidently, no disciple wanted to take that lowly, smelly, menial role and give in to serving his fellow disciples as a foot washer. So Jesus did. Coming to the table with clean feet was an important and ancient practice in their culture. It was needed for ritual cleanliness, also for hygiene, and, oh my, it was so much more comfortable. He, their teacher, their rabbi, their miracle worker, the one with authority over them, he gave them unconditional love, utterly personal love. He was, after all, on his knees as he washed their feet. He knelt before each of them. He respected and cared for them, imperfect as they all were, imperfect as we all are. He washed their dirty, worn-out feet with dignity and kindness. And afterward, that question came, do you know what I have done to you? It rang in their ears. Time stopped. They were somehow disarmed. There'd been a shift. Did they feel suspended in their sudden dramatic vulnerability? Was it a comfort to be wrapped in love's security? It was safe. It came with a sense of hope to be so honored and so personally tended by Jesus himself. More than having just their feet washed, their hearts had been washed. Do you know what I have done to you? They couldn't know all that this foot washing meant that night. And they couldn't know all that it would come to mean in history, not yet. So to help them understand, while they were still gathered at the Last Supper table, Jesus gave them a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. The foot washing was a symbol of the new commandment. In washing their feet, Jesus had given an unexpected example of the new commandment. The foot washing action prefigured the tragic action of the next day, Good Friday, when Jesus, accepting his own murder, gave his ultimate act of love. The question hangs in the air. Do you know what I have done to you? The whole answer to that question is so pivotal in the history of the world that Jesus took more time and words than the new commandment to explain further. That night at the dinner table, Jesus knew this was his final chance to explain all this in words. So, as the disciples finished eating, he went over the whole big picture of everything for them. For 5 more chapters in the Gospel of John, Jesus' voice rings out in famous answer to this question and explains everything. Explains agape love and salvation for the whole world and for all time. Agape, the Greek word for the highest form of love, the kind of love God has for us. God, who so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Normally, we'd all be together at St. Michael's tonight, eating a similar meal before leaving the church, just as Jesus and the disciples finished their meal together and left the upper room and walked through the darkening night to the Garden of Gethsemane. Then, starting with his arrest that awful night, Jesus would deliberately step aside from the world's violence swirling around him because his heart was in a far different place. And because of that, throughout his trial, throughout his brutal torture and his crucifixion, he would not join the frenzy, the panic, the mass hysteria. He would avoid the allure of the fight. He would distance himself from the power struggle, from the hate. And the world has never been the same since. Centuries ago, Julian of Norwich asked Jesus, "What is all this about?" Jesus' answer to her was, "Love. The meaning is love." No wonder Jesus asked the disciples, "Do you know what I've done to you?" Yes, he washed their feet, but he also washed their hearts. So even though we cannot be together at church tonight to wash one another's feet, we can have our heart washed. And we certainly need it these days when our whole world is jolted and held upside down by the coronavirus pandemic. Physically, much of our world's population stays home now, where we're physically safe in isolation from getting and from spreading the virus, if we are fortunate enough to have a home in which to stay and be secure. We're ordered to take the practical safety measures needed for us and the world around us, to stay home and wash our hands. But what about the blessed people who must work, including the medical people, the grocery store people, the postal service people? How do their hearts handle it all? What do we all do with the emotional upset from the danger, the fear, the anxiety and grief, the isolation, the loss of income? Yes, we help others as best we can, even as we ourselves turn to others for help. Yet we know that for spiritual and emotional safety, we all need regular, deep recharging, which only God can give. In order to survive, in order to live, we need to both accept reality and, secondly, from time to time, but regularly, we need to put our hearts somewhere else, to step aside, to recharge, and then keep going. Each of us, despite our circumstances, can be gathered into God's arms to recharge. We can go there to shelter in place with God. We can go to God to stay home safe, with God, our true home, our spiritual home. Sit with God and recharge. Let your heart be washed and held. That security is the heart of truth and gives us life beyond circumstances. In closing, I'd like to share with you 2 heart-washing meditations some other people have taught me. One is called the Love Exchange. Sit quietly, and as you slowly breathe in, pray to God, saying, "I love you, God." Hold it just a few seconds before breathing out and hear God call you by your name, saying, "I love you, Marcia," or "I love you, Peter," "I love you, Judas," "I love you, Thomas." And slowly repeat this simple, short conversation. Pray to God, "I love you, God." Hear God name you, saying, "I love you, Mary." It isn't about how many times you repeat it. It's about exchanging love with God, about letting your heart be washed and centered in God's loving presence. The other meditation is what our former presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Shorey, asked a whole big room full of people to do. She said, for 10 minutes, sit in silence and imagine and hear God say to you two things. God says to you, you are my beloved. With you, I am well pleased. Breathe this in and out slowly and let it sink in. Hear God say to you, you are my beloved. With you, I am well pleased. Let your heart be washed. Maybe it will feel awkward at first. Maybe you will feel your defenses hesitating to accept this completely personal love, unconditional love, ever-present love, eternal love. Peter felt that hesitation when Jesus approached them to wash their feet. Do you feel you might not deserve it? It isn't about deserving. It's about humbly accepting it. It seems God yearns for us to approach, to come offering our open and obedient hearts, to allow our very heart to be washed with God's love, to be held in God's love. Jesus still asks, do you know what I have done to you? What a question. Later tonight, at home, how would you answer him? He's waiting to hear from you, and he loves you. Amen.